From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's coming up. Out of Oklahoma State University, Derrell with this week's cattle market segment. In addition to his market analysis, Derrell shares his observations on cattle production in Mexico based on his recent trip there and relating that to the outlook on cattle imports into the U.S. from that country. Following then, Sarah Moyer with her guest, K-State's Bob Rowland, as he'll talk about his latest swine genetic work that could well lead to the full eradication of a long-standing and devastating disease in piglets known as PRRS. And on this week's 4-H segment, further ahead, K-State's Deryl Waldren previews the 2018 Kansas 4-H Ambassador Training. All that and more here on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
We've a great deal to get into in our cattle market segment this week, including reflections on the state of the cattle industry in Mexico, how that might impact our business here in the U.S., as our guest has just returned from a trip to that country. Derrell is with us once again, livestock economist out of Oklahoma State University, and we'll visit about your observations on the Mexican cattle trade and industry in just a second, Derrell. But recapping last week's market action, not a pretty sight. It was a downward overtone, and particularly if you look at the feeder cattle auctions, at least in Kansas.
Yeah, I think, Southern Plains, for sure, the weakness in feeder cattle markets became very apparent last week. And I think it's a combination of, obviously, futures over the last 2 weeks or so have come off of their, fairly pronounced highs, and that puts pressure on the market. And then you combine that with the fact that much of the Southern Plains is very dry. From the standpoint of winter wheat, conditions are deteriorating pretty rapidly with both dry conditions and the cold weather. And so I think all of that is weighing on these markets. To some extent, we're seeing seasonal weakness somewhat delayed after maintaining better than expected prices through much of the fall, when we normally would have seen these seasonal weaknesses happen a little bit earlier. So
you're suggesting that the shoe was poised to fall, it was just put back a few weeks, in effect?
Well, I think that's one way to look at it. And again, the weakness is off of price levels that we really probably didn't anticipate, 3 or 4 months ago that we would maintain through the fall. So, we're still not necessarily in too bad a shape, but we're certainly feeling the effects of this weakness right now.
And the fed cattle market backtracked some too last week, and a lot of folks have shown interest in how beef demand was going to hold up between the Thanksgiving and Christmas holidays. What's your read on all of that?
Well, if you look at the demand side, especially wholesale box beef cuts, have been volatile the last week and a half or so. They've been jumping up and down, but maintaining overall, reasonably good levels. They have weakened slightly, and that's not too surprising. But I think that is, that again combined with the weakness in futures on the live cattle contract has weighed on these fed cattle prices. And of course, the time of the year, it's easy to see some pressure on these markets, particularly as we get into colder weather and so on.
And we'll talk about what might be ahead in the trading week before us in just a second here. Tell us about your journey to Mexico, and this is not the first time by any means you've spent time interacting with the beef cattle industry in that country. What was the nature of this trip?
Well, this particular trip had a specific focus on a binational conference on agricultural extension, really work to try to sort of jumpstart or restart extension programming in Mexico that has been interrupted in recent years. But in addition to that, of course, I have worked down there for many years, and it was a chance to visit with a number of colleagues in that area and get a bit of an update on conditions. We're at the end of, or past the end of the rainy season in Mexico. They had a pretty good summer wet season. Pasture conditions were pretty good, although it turned sharply slightly drier at the end of that. But in general, from a cattle industry perspective, producers report that forage conditions are pretty good, and markets have been pretty good. Obviously, the U.S. market has continued to attract cattle north, but their domestic market in Mexico, with the growth in cattle feeding in the country, also continues to demand more and more cattle. So they've had, relative to a historical focus on exporting cattle mostly to the U.S., at least out of northern Mexico, they now have more marketing alternatives available to them.
So that will perhaps change the complexion of our trade with Mexico for a time ahead, you're suggesting.
I think it does. It provides more potential dynamics in this market. Again, the Mexican market, which domestically was always, quite a bit separated from the U.S. market, and now you see those two markets much more on par with each other and really competing in the same market. So, this has the potential as we go forward to provide some different dynamics to those flows of feeder cattle, particularly that historically have been almost exclusively exported to the U.S.
We might mention by the same token, though, that there's new information out of the USDA on Mexican and Canadian cattle imports into the U.S. here in 2017. And it is anticipated that we will import more cattle from Mexico this year than last year, but maybe not at a peak, if you will.
Well, that's right. Again, the recovery in U.S. markets has translated into an increase. Cattle imports from Mexico are up about 24-25% compared to last year, and it puts them on pace here on an annual basis to be at approximately the average level we've seen for the last 20 years or so. So, they've managed to maintain those exports at these levels, even though, they've got a stronger market in Mexico for those cattle as well.
And as you look ahead then, imports from Mexico looking into 2018 should be stable?
I would look for them relative to where we end up in 2017 to be pretty stable. I think it would be difficult for them to actually increase those, given all the things we just said. And depending on what happens in U.S. markets, we may see at least some modest weakening of prices in the U.S. And if that happens, it would be easy for those numbers, those imports from Mexico, to actually back off just a little bit in 2018. I don't know that I expect them to change that much, but it will be kind of a close balance. So I think they'll be fairly sensitive to price levels in the U.S., certainly relative to their domestic market in Mexico.
All right. Something else you've been involved with, and actually your colleague here at K-State, Glenn Tonzer, mentioned this in brief in our visit this time last week, and that is you and colleagues at Oklahoma State have been involved in very unique research into beef steak size and consumer response to that size. You might elaborate on this work, Deryl.
Well, this work was done, in conjunction with a graduate student's dissertation work, and really it was in response to this notion that we hear from the industry a lot, that as cattle carcasses, steer carcasses have continued to get bigger. That means that muscle cuts get larger in surface area. These ribeyes and tenderloins just continue to get bigger around, and of course that means that if you continue to cut them at the same thickness that we really prefer from the standpoint of people who really are steak aficionados, that means the overall product weight and obviously then the cost of that product continues to go up. And one of the responses that we hear from the industry is that one way to fix that problem is to cut the steaks thinner. And that reduces weight and cost, whether it's in a grocery store retail package or whether it's at a restaurant in terms of plate cost. And that's a response. And the consumer survey work confirmed what we suspected, and that was that, thinner steaks is not what is preferred by people, and that, in fact, at some point, you begin to sort of erode your demand preferences when you provide those thinner and thinner steaks. So it becomes a bit of a sort of a cautionary note to the industry to recognize that product size, in addition to things like choice versus select or prime even, are all quality factors that matter, and that we can't continue to ignore the implications of these bigger and bigger carcasses.
Do you think that this work sends any signals back to producers to the point of their genetic selection for beef quality? Do you see a backflow, if you will, from the study?
Well, I think it could lead to that. I don't think it's happening yet, and that's one of the reasons that we continue. Obviously, carcasses have gotten bigger because, more pounds per animal is in general perceived as more efficiency, certainly at the feedlot and the packer level, not necessarily at the cow-calf level because these cows have also gotten bigger. But it all comes down to the economics, and right now there are no price signals that suggest that we, go the other way or maybe more likely moderate the size of these cattle. But I think the implication of this study is that we could be headed towards that, where there will be price signals that start at the consumer level that actually suggest that bigger is not necessarily going to be better if we continue to make these products bigger and bigger. So I don't think we're there yet. I think producers are responding to the incentives that exist in the marketplace, but this suggests that we could someday, at some point, see a change in those incentives, those market signals, and cause us to moderate these carcass weights a bit.
That's quite interesting work. It has garnered considerable attention, not only locally but nationally of late, so well done on the part of you and colleagues at Oklahoma State. Well, as we look to the trading week ahead, will we see the markets find their footing once again after a rather rugged week last week?
It's a little tough to call this week because we're in this sort of holiday period, particularly now we're approaching, mid-December. The fed cattle markets, I think, will, they're more likely to kind of move sideways, but there's going to be more immediate, kind of supply-demand balances, who's got product bought and so on. Feeder cattle markets, I think, will probably stabilize a little bit after the adjustments that we've had. I don't see them necessarily needing to continue to weaken a great deal. But again, we're in that holiday period. There won't be a lot of demand with the kind of cold weather and so on that we've had lately. So it will continue to keep a lid on any potential in those markets.
We appreciate your insight as always, and in advance, happy holidays, Derrell. We will talk with you again in the new year, amazingly enough. Thanks.
You're very welcome.
He is Deryl Peel out of Oklahoma State University. He's a livestock economist there and providing this week's remarks on the cattle trading trends here on Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today. I'm Sarah Moyer. The porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome virus, commonly known as PRRS, has positioned itself as a major threat in the swine industry for over 30 years. We have one of the researchers here at K-State who's been dedicating a large majority of his career to helping solve this issue in the swine industry. Here on Today, K-State microbiologist Bob Rowland. He's been collaborating with other researchers. Bob, why don't you go ahead and give us a background on both the virus and your history with it?
I've been working on porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome virus for more than 20 years now. And during that 20-year period, this has emerged as the most devastating disease to ever face the swine industry. There are a lot of control measures we've tried in the past. None of them have been effective in eliminating or controlling this disease. And so we see this disease in two forms. We see it as a respiratory disease in young pigs. That effect carries on through finish. And then we also see a reproductive form, and that gives it its name, porcine reproductive and respiratory syndrome virus.
So the age and the physiological state of a pig would play into how this virus affects it?
In its reproductive form, that's where you see its greatest devastating effect. Each year, about $600 million in losses to the pork industry. Much of that you can attribute to the reproductive form of the disease.
That is quite the impact. Describe some of the symptoms associated with this virus, what it does to herds.
In terms of reproductive form, we see it in its most severe form as an abortion storm. And that not only has a tremendous economic impact, but you can imagine that it also has a psychological impact, especially people who work with pigs. In its reproductive form, these are late gestation pregnant sows and gilts. They become infected, and again, you can have an abortion storm. But in its mildest form, you see pigs that are weak, that are born weak, and this carries on again throughout production. So when we look at ways to control this disease, it really begins with reproduction. How do you keep it out of the reproductive farm? And so there are tremendous biosecurity measures that are being implemented to do that. One of them is to screen semen, to make sure that semen is PRRS-free. The other is that new reproductive gilts that come into a reproductive farm to make sure that they don't have PRRS and you can keep PRRS out.
An advancement with controlling or managing this disease is where we want to focus today, some extra time. Bob, you being someone who has a lot of expertise in this area, describe the research that you've been involved with and the impacts it's making.
And this is where I need to mention our collaborators at University of Missouri, who are not only collaborators, but they're great friends. And they're the ones who created the pig. The use of a genetically modified pig, in this case a pig that has been genome edited to remove an important molecule called CD163. And then we are the ones who really test its utility in the industry. That is our role.
How have you then put that into action?
So in terms of how this works, in earlier work we showed that if you remove CD163 from the pig, it does not get PRRS. This is the first time in the history of this disease that we have prevented the infection of an animal. And this is really, I think, the tremendous impact that research has had on the industry. But it's just a starting point. And so now the question is how do you give it utility? How do you make it useful? And what we found is that if you take this CD163 knockout dam, you've actually protected the fetuses from the disease. In this paper, we demonstrate that fetuses cannot become infected if the dam is CD163 negative. Now, the important aspect of this is that these fetuses are normal. They have CD163. And so what we've demonstrated is that we can create this protective shell around the fetus and protect it during the reproductive phase of production. Now what you should know is that these pigs, when they're born, they're normal, and they are susceptible to the disease. So we can't forget about some of the other aspects of disease control, such as vaccines and biosecurity. But during this critical phase of production, the way I term it is that we've essentially ended a disease. And we do that with what we call simple Mendelian genetics, which we all had in high school. And that is the boar that donates the semen is wild type, has normal CD163. And so when you breed that CD163 positive boar with the CD163 negative dam, you get a fetus that we call heterozygous. But it's important to note that this heterozygous fetus is normal and expresses normal levels of CD163. What we say is that phenotypically it becomes indistinguishable from a normal pig.
This is truly fascinating technology and, of course, exciting with the opportunities that lie ahead for eliminating this virus in the pig herd. Bob, how has this disease been making such a large impact? What characteristics, other than the physical symptoms, make this virus so deadly?
One reason it's devastating is the fact that it's unpredictable. You know, it's very difficult to predict when one of these abortion storms is going to happen. And again, the other aspect of the reproductive form is really death by 1,000 cuts. The pig is born weak, and it takes so long to catch up during production. So we've really kind of ended two forms of the reproductive disease. But I just want to iterate one point, is that this is the end of a disease that has been devastating the industry. And the publication that describes this is probably one of the shortest publications I've ever written because it's so simple.
Yes, simple but effective. And the technology behind the advancement, can you tell us more about that?
The original discovery, again, Randy Prather at University of Missouri made these knockout pigs. And these knockout pigs were made using the CRISPR-Cas9 system. And that has been phenomenal in two ways. First, some of the early transgenic pigs that Randy made took 10 years to make. These pigs can be made in as short a time as 3 months. So we have really shortened the time in which we can make these modified pigs. The other thing is that the CRISPR-Cas9 is something that is really having broad utility, not only for livestock but for people. I mean, we're using this technology to cure cancer in people, to eliminate HIV. So it's the new technology, and the important thing about it is that it doesn't, quote unquote, adulterate the genome. The technology is essentially going in with a pair of micro scissors, cutting out a little piece of the genome. In this case, 4 bases. 4 out of 1.2 billion bases were just snipped out. And that created the knockout. So this step that we're talking about is we have this knockout pig. Well, how do you give it utility in the industry? And the idea is using this knockout technology to make a pig that is normal. And so by targeting this phase of the disease, we can do that.
As you've alluded and mentioned outside of this interview, the human health implications of better technology and the implications in the livestock industry go hand in hand because both benefit when technology is improving, correct?
We do the technology, we do the science. And one thing about livestock production, every advance in livestock production has come through new technologies. And I think that's the important thing to emphasize here. If and when it's going to be used, that's up to, the policymakers, the regulators, and eventually the consumer. But all we can do is make the healthy pig. That's our job.
Bob, as we move toward wrapping up, will you explain some of the next steps, what's next in sight for this technology and the opportunity to eliminate the PRRS virus?
We know that we can go in and we can make a precision cut and knock out the gene entirely. But now we want to go back and fill the missing pieces back in to find out what portion of CD163 is responsible for interacting with the virus. And this is a tool. It doesn't mean that we give up on vaccines or diagnostics, but what it does do is it creates the opportunity for these other tools to become more effective. In other words, we're producing this normal pig. Well, this normal pig is still going to need a diagnostic test, still going to need a vaccine. But the neat thing is that this pig is born healthy, so it's going to respond better to a vaccine. So we're actually going to be enhancing some of those other aspects of disease control.
Well, thank you, Bob, for coming on today, talking about the PRRS virus and all the advancements that are going on, working towards solutions for farmers who have encountered losses related to this disease. Once again, that was K-State microbiologist Bob Rowland. He has been one of the leaders in this push towards ending the PRRS virus and all of the negative impacts it's had on the swine industry over the last 30 years. I'm Sarah Moyer with Agriculture Today. Stay tuned here on the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Agriculture Today continues here on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson with you as we glance at today's agricultural news headlines now, courtesy in part of DTN. Farmers in northern plains states and parts of the Corn Belt will lose the prospect of larger potential payouts under prevented planting claims following a crop insurance change announced last week by the USDA's Risk Management Agency. For years, the Obama administration repeatedly sought a $1.4 billion cost savings over 10 years by asking Congress to reform the prevented planting coverage by eliminating the option of buying 10% higher coverage for prevented planting. Without calling on Congress, the Trump administration made multiple changes to prevented planting insurance last week in line with the spending cuts that were proposed in the Obama era. The memo sent out to insurers and USDA Risk Management Agency field offices, the USDA eliminating the prevented planting plus 10% option for the 2018 crop year and for future crop years. Now, the USDA did keep the 5% option available to producers, though analysis shows very few producers have taken that 5% option. The 10% option paid out more than $4 billion in indemnities from the years 1994 to 2013. The USDA staff did not reply to questions about the projected cost savings or how USDA Secretary Sonny Perdue would use those savings. Multiple lobbyists told DTN that the USDA's announcement came as a surprise, and there was no advanced consultation with commodity organizations. One lobbyist said the secretary had been wanting to expand insurance options for livestock and dairy producers, and that the move was possibly done as a way to free up money for those efforts. The move on the buy-up option affects two states the most, North Dakota and South Dakota. Over a two-decade period from 94 to 2013, the 10% prevented planting option led to more than $2 billion in indemnities for North Dakota. And in South Dakota, that option paid out $680 million over that time. Those numbers come from a 2015 study of prevented planting done for the USDA by the firm Agrilytica Consulting. Agrilytica showed that eliminating the buy-up option for prevented planting would have reduced indemnities overall by nearly $813 million in a 5-year period from 2008 to 2012. Of that $813 million in savings, $499 million, or about 61%, would come from 4 states, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Kansas. Secretary Perdue says he expects the NAFTA negotiations to go down to the wire, but that deals will come at the last minute. More on that in this report from the USDA's Stephanie Ho.
I think trade negotiations a little bit like the way I do Christmas.
Ag Secretary Sonny Perdue was responding to a reporter's question about ongoing NAFTA negotiations.
You know, I do my shopping on the 24th. That's typically when these negotiations get done, and the last throes, days of those negotiations. Everyone works better with a timeline when it comes to negotiation.
He says all sides have laid out their positions and that even if they don't initially agree, they will find a way to negotiate and move forward.
There are going to be some anxious moments for our agricultural producers across the country. At the end of the day, I do believe we will get an agreement over NAFTA.
Canadian and Mexican officials meet with their American counterparts in Washington Monday for more NAFTA talks. Secretary Perdue is speaking at Florida A&M University, where he presided over a roundtable discussion on youth in agriculture. This is Stephanie Ho for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And 8 U.S. senators who met with President Trump last week are expected to reach out to lawmakers from corn ethanol states on the renewable fuel standard in order to find ways to make the law acceptable to both sides. Reuters reported on Friday the president asked those senators to find a solution during the meeting that also included EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. 8 senators from oil-producing states raised their concerns about the costs to comply with the RFS, namely when it comes to the price of renewable identification numbers, or RINs. According to news reports, one idea presented to the president would be to cap the price of RINs as a way to keep compliance costs in check. Next up on Agriculture Today, this week's edition of Tree Tales from the Kansas Forest Service here at K-State. Here is K-State Forester Jaron Tyndall. Jaron?
The most productive and diverse part of our landscape is usually right next to our streams. This is known as the riparian area, and its management has received increased attention in recent years due to the critical part it plays in water and wildlife issues. Riparian areas are often converted to cropland because of soil fertility and convenient access to irrigation water. Intensive use of the land for growing crops can have a negative environmental consequence when soil, water, and wildlife conservation are not made a priority. Farming practices such as chisel-plowed row cropping and installation of surface and subsurface drains adversely affect the hydrology and water quality of riparian areas. Removal of streamside trees increases the amount of sunlight that enters the channel, which elevates water temperatures. Vegetation removal also exposes soil to direct raindrop impact, increase in erosion. When a riparian system is degraded, heavy runoff moves through the riparian zone directly into river channels. Fine sediments can fill up stream pools, alter the shape of the stream channel, and cover rocky stream bottoms, thereby impairing important shelter, spawning, and food-producing areas for fish. Runoff can bring seeds of non-native and non-riparian plant species, reducing habitat for wildlife and aquatic organisms, and the local water table can be lowered as aggressive non-native plants crowd stream areas. Degradation of the native plant community can create a fire risk by increasing fuel loads. As streamside areas lose their ability to buffer and protect our streams, new limits are imposed on aquatic life, the cost of treating drinking water increases, and the recreational and aesthetic appeal of our streams and reservoirs declines. Landowners wishing to remedy or reverse this kind of stream degradation are often challenged by the prospect of sacrificing valuable farm ground or changing the way they manage their livestock. Riparian restoration projects in cropland settings often require native trees, shrubs, grasses, and forbs to be planted around streams. In range and pasture settings, livestock disturbance to existing riparian plant communities may need to be reduced to acceptable levels by installing automatic waterers away from the stream. In an effort to offset the costs and time required to rehabilitate riparian areas, a number of conservation agencies offer financial assistance and technical guidance to landowners. These public resources help ease the transition to land management practices that leave more room for natural systems to function. You've been listening to Part 4 of the Tree Tales series, Riparian Systems. For more information on riparian areas and their management, please visit kansasforests.org. This has been Jaron Tyndall with the Kansas Forest Service, bringing you another Tree Tale.
Thanks, Jaron, and we'll be back on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
This Agriculture Today closes out with our weekly segment on the Kansas 4-H program. 4-H ambassadors serve an important local function in supporting and promoting 4-H around Kansas, and those young people who serve as ambassadors have a chance to go through important training coming up in the early part of 2018, in February, to be more precise. This is the annual Kansas 4-H Ambassador Training at Rock Springs 4-H Center. The details have all been pulled together now, and going over a preview of this event is Deryl Waldren. Deryl is the Research and Extension 4-H Specialist for K-State, based in Northwest Kansas, and he's overseeing this program along with a few others chipping in as well. But this is a very important event on the 4-H calendar every year, is it not, Deryl?
Yes, Eric, it really is, because the Ambassador Program started in 1982 in Kansas 4-H Youth Development, and it's been rolling along for 35 years. And the purpose of the Ambassador Program is to give teens, roughly 8th grade through 12th grade, the leadership, communication, and marketing skills that they need to go back home and work with their local extension staff to grow the local program, to help grow 4-H and strengthen that county program or district county program.
So in support of those young people who serve in this post as a 4-H ambassador locally, this training is held every year to give them guidance on how to accomplish their local goals more effectively.
Yes, so we have a variety of workshops that we'll get into and explain a little bit. So we have a track for youth and then also a track for the adult advisors, because we also invite the adult advisors and extension staff to this training. And actually it's open to anybody who's interested in coming from 8th through 12th grade. The only caveat is that sometimes county programs or district programs can't provide a chaperone and or transportation, but that doesn't mean that youth still can't come even if they don't have a county or a district ambassador program in their local unit.
Specifically, this will be held again at Rock Springs, February the 23rd and the 24th. The theme this year, as identified, is Leadership on Target. To what does that refer, Deryl?
Well, we're using an archery target kind of as our graphic, and ambassadors are always helping keep the program on target, and with that, the leadership skills. So we try to generally have a theme that is involving around leadership, communication, or marketing, and this year reflects that.
So if you would, and this does take place on a Friday evening into the following Saturday, give us just a flavor of some of the topics that will be made available to those participating in this training.
Well, on Friday night, we're going to do mostly the fun stuff. We'll have some group builders, some games that we're calling 4-H shoot-off games will be in the lower level of Heritage, and then we'll also then go out to the new indoor activity building and be able to make s'mores and have hot chocolate and other snacks. And so the Friday night is kind of socializing, getting to know each other better. So the core education part is all on Saturday, and we offer a variety of workshops. So we have first-year workshops for brand-new ambassadors, and then we have workshops for second year and above, those that are returning, because often counties or districts will have their ambassadors come for more than 1 year because they serve more than 1 year. So this year's workshops include, for the first-year people, True Colors, Growing 4-H Leadership, which will be a basic leadership workshop, and then using media to promote 4-H. And then for those that are second year and above and have attended before, we've got another advanced leadership workshop called Leadership on the Mark. And the next one would be making quality video clips for 4-H. And then the last one would be 4-H Leadership Challenges, where they can learn more about Portable Challenge and have some nice games and things that they can present to 4-H groups. We do have some adult-only, or the advisors workshops, and those are all conducted by me, and we're going to do some tips on the program as well as a roundtable discussion in the first adult workshop. And then the kids all take this for brand new, take the True Colors, so I'm going to do a new workshop called Understanding True Colors, because often the adults don't quite understand how that all fits in and how they can maximize and get the most out of their teens, whatever color they are in the True Colors training. And then the last one would be I'm going to do is making social media ads and helping those adults understand how they can jazz up their marketing efforts locally. Mm-hmm. So those are the 9 different workshops that we'll be offering. We also have Dr. Emily Lenning, who's the Associate Vice President of Student Life at Kansas State University in Manhattan. She'll be doing a leadership talk, and then we'll have one other speaker late in the afternoon.
So it's a well-rounded program. It covers many things that these young people need to have a familiarity with, if nothing else, as they go about promoting 4-H locally as ambassadors. As far as participating, well, there's still plenty of time to register, but you'd like to sort of get the ball rolling in that area, would you not?
Yes, registration opens this week, and it's on the CVent registration system that Kansas 4-H Youth Development uses. So the easiest way to find that registration site is to go to the main Kansas 4-H website, which is www.kansas4-h.org. Again, that'd be kansas4h.org. And on that homepage, you'll see on the right side what's hot, and click on the ambassador link. And that'll give you the information that you need, all about the dates and the cost, which is $114 for any participant. And then it takes you to the registration link on CVent, where you can get signed up for the training.
And you've until February 8th to take care of registration. But if you would like to take part in this as a 4-H ambassador or as an adult interested in this aspect of 4-H, why, you ought to get on this as soon as possible and to reserve your spot at the 2018 Kansas 4-H Ambassador Training. Again, February the 23rd and 24th. It'll take place on that Friday and Saturday at Rock Springs 4-H Center. It is a great event every year. Lots to learn, lots to pick up, lots of camaraderie amongst these young people as well. So, Derrell, thank you for previewing the event with us right here.
Thank you. And if folks have more questions, they can give me a ring at 785-462-6281 or email me at dwaldren@ksu.edu. So again, that's DWALDREN @ksu.edu. So it's been a pleasure talking with you, Eric, today.
Likewise. Deryl Waldren with us for this week's Kansas 4-H segment. He is the 4-H specialist, K-State Research and Extension in Northwest Kansas. Before we close out today's program, one parting reminder that this broadcast is now available in podcast form. If you would like to subscribe to that, go to this address, ksre.ksu.edu/news. Click on the Radio Network tab, then the Agriculture Today link, and the instructions for subscribing are right there at ksre.ksu.edu/news. Meantime, thanks for tuning in today. For Sarah Moyer, Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.